Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and we're 1 week into early access of Path of Exile 2. So, what's the verdict? Is it everything everyone hoped for, or was it overhyped? We're going to talk about Path of Exile 2's release week and the 2 patches we got this week with the buffs and nerfs that came with them, but we'll also cover other gaming news of the week, including highlights from the Game Awards, Ubisoft's desperate bid for survival, a new community event coming to Diablo 4, and more. And as a reminder, folks, if you need any tips or guides for Diablo 4, I have all my video content categorized on my website, Rhykker.com, which brings us to a word from our video sponsor. I built my website using Squarespace, and I was able to do everything myself, quickly and easily, and with zero education in the field, all thanks to how easy Squarespace is to work with. Squarespace even has a new AI tool called Design Intelligence, which combines 2 decades of industry-leading web design expertise with the latest AI tech to empower you to build a beautiful-looking, personalized website made exactly for your needs and your unique identity. Squarespace even has optimized SEO tools so that you can launch your website and start getting views as quickly as possible. Squarespace is flexible for any kind of website, with tons of design options to pick from. You can easily connect all your social accounts and also upload your video content and organize your video library. You can sell products or services. And with Squarespace Payment, you have an easy way to manage your payments in one place. You're just a few clicks away from being able to receive payments through your website, all while offering customers popular payment methods like Apple Pay, ClearPay, Klarna, and ACH Direct Debit. Basically, if you want to build a website, I recommend Squarespace. So head to squarespace.com/Rhykker or click the link in the description to start your free trial and use code Rhykker to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/RHYKKER and use code Rhykker. So we're 1 week into the life of Path of Exile 2, and it's been one hell of a launch week. The game launched on Friday, and by Sunday, the Steam concurrent player peak hit just shy of 580,000. And that's just on Steam, not counting console players or people using the dedicated launcher like me. So I think the real number was easily 1 million. The game has received very positive user reviews on Steam, and on OpenCritic, it has a top critic average score of 87 out of 100, with 100% of critics recommending the game. And while this is not yet my review, I will give the game my endorsement. People ask me, is PoE 2 worth it? And for me, yes, it has been 100% worth it so far. I'm just about to get into the end game, but even if I were to start hating the game at that point, which I doubt is going to happen, but even if it were the case, I've still thoroughly enjoyed my journey there, and you get a ton of hours of fun and entertainment just in the campaign. I will hang one caveat, however. I fully recommend this game to any ARPG fan who is willing to take on a challenging gameplay experience. It's not quite Dark Souls, but it is the most challenging ARPG out there, apart from No Rest for the Wicked, which is full-on Dark Souls. So if you're open to a slower-paced, more challenging experience, then PoE 2 will scratch your itch. But one thing I knew from the moment I first tried PoE 2 at ExileCon in 2019 to when I tried it again at Gamescom last year was that PoE 2 would not be for everyone. That a lot of PoE 1 players who want the zoom, blow up entire screens of enemies in a millisecond while dropping enough loot to cause a NASA computer to seize up if you don't have a loot filter running, that kind of gameplay, yeah, people who are into that, probably not going to be too into PoE 2. And that's why I was so smart of GGG to continue to support PoE 1 and have both games coexist as their own separate entities, because they each offer very different experiences and can make different groups of players happy. PoE 2 is basically the best realization of PoE's Ruthless mode. A mode that wasn't exactly popular in PoE 1, but it works so much better with the new combat engine. I had zero interest in Ruthless in PoE 1, but I'm loving PoE 2. One of the game's greatest strengths is its boss designs. So many bosses, each unique both visually and from a gameplay perspective. Each has its own tricks you gotta learn to best counterplay them. I'm comfortable with the current level of challenge in the game. I've seen some people call for nerfs to difficulty, especially at the start. But honestly, the start being a slap in the face is exactly the message that needs to be sent. This is not an easy game. Being coddled early game only to then get stuck like at the Act 1 boss out of nowhere, that'll be a more frustrating experience than getting a nice slap in the face early on telling you that you're gonna have to get good. And I feel that the game actually gets easier as you go along. From a practical standpoint, replaying the campaign on Cruel was easier than playing it on Normal because my build was really starting to come together at that point. I was optimizing my gear and my skill setup. Again, though, I am about to start mapping, so we'll see if my impression changes at that point. I'm loving the updated skill system, doing away with gear sockets. Such a great change. Spirit works wonderfully as an extra resource. Mana reservation, it was an interesting idea in theory, but in practice, the way it worked out just wasn't very fun. Now, one big complaint I'm seeing from players, or I was seeing, was about drop rates for loot and currency items. I actually was fine with the way things as they were, but I have to admit I got some really lucky drops. If you've either seen my stream or my highlight video is going to be coming out hopefully tomorrow, you'll see some of my luck there. I got some really juicy drops, but I think one thing that I'm really liking about the loot system altogether is that I'm really happy that we don't need a loot filter. But within a couple of days post-launch, the devs released a patch that actually improved drops in a number of ways, including a sort of unlucky drop protection, you can say. And preliminary results have been very positive, and this actually has had a ripple effect onto other criticism of the game as well, because more loot and more currency means people are better able to tackle the difficulty, they're better able to engage with the crafting system, and just otherwise enjoy the game. And it definitely was the right idea to start off with loot undertuned than overtuned. Nerfs to loot are never taken well. But one pain point I see brought up that so far I kind of agree with is ascendancies, or rather getting your ascendancies. The trials are frustrating. They're unforgiving, and you can easily fail at the very end, losing your entire run. I failed on my second ascendancy trial, so I did the first one, I got my first 2 points. On my second one, I died right at the end against the boss, and now I'm just waiting to be massively overleveled before trying again, because I'm loving the rest of the game. I'm loving the rest of the game too much to spend a good chunk of my game time doing something that doesn't bring me joy. And right now, I just don't feel like the trade-off in power that I would get from those 2 points is enough to put up with the extra frustration that I'm going to feel going through that again. Then add on to this that at later levels, ascending is locked behind the RNG of actually finding a key to run the trial, and then that key is wasted if you fail. And yeah, I never thought I would, but I actually miss PoE 1's Labyrinth. Outside of that, I've seen criticism of the campaign length. Not that it's a problem that it's long, but that part of the reason it's long is because zones are just absolutely enormous and they take forever to get through, especially due to the general move speed in PoE 2 being pretty low and the removal of most mobility skills. I'm not in favor of adding back in mobility skills and high-speed movement. Don't get me wrong, this is pretty contrary to how I normally feel in games. I love to zoom, I love mobility, I love movement skills, but we don't want to trivialize the best content in PoE 2, which is the bosses, and they're designed and balanced around players not being able to just easily run circles around them, evading all their attacks. That said, it does feel a little unfair that our move speed is so slow, yet the speed of even just normal monsters can be so fast that sometimes we can't even keep away from them. It just feels like there's no counterplay when monsters are so fast that they can surround you even when you're dodge rolling away. Like, they come up to you, you dodge roll, and they're so fast that by the time you're even done dodge rolling, they've surrounded you again. But again, I did enjoy my campaign playthrough. Sure, there were a couple zones where I'm like, ooh, this is a really big zone. Some trimming, you know, wouldn't hurt here and there. I hear maps as well, endgame mapping, really big. And it's especially extra feels bad when you die and then all the monsters in a zone respawn. And if you aren't at a good checkpoint, then you basically have to work your way back through a ton of trash mobs. That's one thing that I really wasn't sold on. I totally understand. You die against a boss, okay, it resets, you gotta redo the whole boss fight again. Sure. But for every monster in a zone to respawn, that just kind of feels like a really weird punishment, because it's not a challenge to go through all those monsters again, it's just costing you time. And again, apparently in endgame mapping, it's even worse, because if you die one single time in a map, you lose the map entirely. You fail, you lose the key, good day, sir. And given how big maps are and how long it takes to complete them, that's a lot of time a player needs to spend paying 100% attention to the game, because the slightest lapse in vigilance can mean a quick death that wastes the whole run and map key. Oh, and related, loot despawning if you die. Man, is that a feels bad moment. Imagine you kill a tough monster, you see a unique drop, then there's some post-death explosion that instantly kills you. Ouch. The unique is gone, whether in campaign or in maps. And on that topic, I complained about these in Diablo 4, I'll complain about them in Path of Exile 2. Post-death revenge mechanics are not fun. I've not seen a lot of them in PoE 2, thankfully. But once you have defeated the monster, you feel really satisfied, you're past the climax of the moment, it's a release of tension, the danger is past, and then boom, a surprise FU from the game. It just results in players feeling like they need to be constantly paranoid, and it interrupts the typical emotional reward loop of defeating a monster and overcoming a challenge. We had these post-death monster one-shots in PoE 1 because the extreme pace of the game basically required it. Without that, nothing really kills you, so we had to have those to retain some element of danger, but in PoE 2, every fight is dangerous, every fight can kill you, so it seems we don't really need to have these extra FU on-death revenge mechanics. On a somewhat related note, monsters, and especially bosses, they have their attacks really well telegraphed. But sometimes the visual noise, especially if you're running a minion build like I am, I got all my an army of minions and I'm summoning a bunch of firewalls. There's just so much stuff on screen. It can make it tough to read the battlefield in a game where it's really important to read the battlefield. And I've also found myself confused by the environments at times. I'm like getting stuck on invisible walls. I'm not understanding why my character's not moving because sometimes the walls don't look like walls. Like there's a shallow pond and I don't understand that my character can't actually take a step in an inch of water. So I always have to be looking at the overlay map or the mini map in the corner in order to ensure that I understand where the walls are. Not a huge deal until you're getting surrounded by monsters and wondering why is my character not moving away. Now again, while I've thoroughly enjoyed my campaign playthrough, I am not exactly eager to repeat the experience on multiple other characters. And I know this is a point of contention in the PoE community. I know some people in the community have been asking for a campaign skip button for years, but I know others feel the campaign is an important and integral part of the game and should not be skipped. And I'm not going to say what the devs should or should not do here. I'm not going to say add a campaign skip. What I will say is I am less likely to make another character because the thought of playing through the campaign again is daunting. Again, I really enjoyed my playthrough. But I also really enjoyed the Netflix series Arcane, but I don't feel like watching it again right now because I've already watched it. But anyway, in that same patch that buffed item and currency drops, the devs also implemented more checkpoints in big maps and the ability to teleport between checkpoints you've already discovered, which actually hugely addresses a lot of the complaints surrounding the size of maps and the respawning monsters. You don't have to full clear a map again if you can just teleport forward to a checkpoint. It was a great way to resolve the issues people were bringing up without like increasing move speed, for instance, or giving us mobility powers. And another complaint that the devs addressed with this patch was about the dodge rolls. People were complaining about getting surrounded by monsters too easily and not being able to dodge roll out of them. This was especially silly when you were surrounded by a ton of like tiny monsters like those little beetles, and it just feels like your character should be able to just like step over them. Anyway, they've made changes to the dodge roll so that while we still can be surrounded and blocked in, we could more easily dodge roll through small gaps in enemy groups, and we can now push back small monsters when we dodge roll. Excellent changes there. Excellent changes everywhere. In fact, the whole patch, just a huge win. Again, addressing pretty much all major criticism with the game, and so quickly as well. That's the most surprising part. They didn't even wait a week. Now, the patches didn't just bring buffs, we also had nerfs to some skills and interactions. Some of them came in hotfixes, actually. We got nerfs to gas grenades and gas arrows setting off explosions. Magnetic salvo was nerfed, supercharged slam. But the deepest cut for a lot of people came in another patch later this week. Cast on X builds were gutted, which killed a popular cast on freeze build that had emerged, making it deal basically 90% less damage and effectively bricking the progress of players running that setup. I'm fully in favor of nerfs in early access. That's the whole point. We're testing balance. But I did expect people who were affected to get a free respec. If they haven't stockpiled a bunch of gold and extra gear, they can't respec. Some people are advocating for making all respec free during early access. I don't think that's a good idea because GGG needs to test how people feel about respec costs. But yeah, some system where, okay, skill X got nerfed, all builds using skill X automatically get a full respec. Respec was a real issue for new players in PoE 1. Farming Orbs of Regret was easy for advanced players in endgame, but impossible for new players early in the game. A new player would easily brick their first character and have to start a new one. Now, with respec being governed with gold, I did a ton of respecing at low level. But I see some people saying that the high level respec is way too expensive. I'm not there yet, so I can't weigh in myself, but it seems we have now the opposite problem that we had in PoE 1. Now, speaking of respec, the passive tree. One thing I'm finding is that I'm spending a lot of my points just grabbing attribute nodes. It feels like, in general, attribute requirements are really high in PoE 2. I also feel like PoE 1 had more interesting nodes to path to in the tree. Well, I do find stuff that is good for my build. It's not that I run out of things that I need. I just don't find a lot of that stuff to be really exciting. The way like PoE 1 would have some really build-changing stuff that you'd be excited to path towards. And because of the steep attribute requirements, it would be nice to have an easier way to get lower level skill gems. Like if I have a level 13 uncut skill gem, that should allow me to craft any skill gem up to level 13 in case I need one that has, lower stat requirements. Currently, I'd have to go to some lower level zone where I would just guess that it's going to drop that level of gem, and I'd have to spend a bunch of time farming there. Now, one concern I have is about the balance between trade and non-trade players. In PoE 1, you had a lot of robust crafting options, such that if you were to be solo self-found, you could still get a lot of the gear that you need through deterministic crafting. But now in PoE 2, we're largely at the mercy of RNG with our crafting. As far as I can tell, we actually don't really have any deterministic crafting options, or at least nothing robust, which means that trading is going to be even more powerful in PoE 2. I'm not saying this is a problem or that anything should be changed here, it's just something that's on my mind. I'm currently fine with the crafting options available to us, and I do like that we've actually done away with obscure vendor recipes that you need to memorize or reference external guides for, but I sometimes find myself wondering how much easier my playthrough would be if I engaged with trade. Then one topic of discussion I'd like to have right now with you folks. It seems as though there's a general consensus that there's an imbalance in difficulty between melee play and ranged play. People say melee is really fun, but that it is a much greater challenge. And the question I want to raise is that okay? Should both melee and ranged playstyle be equally challenging, or is it okay to have melee be a sort of challenge mode? Like, do we want all playstyles to be equally challenging, or should some be easier and some harder for players who are looking for either an easier or a harder time? And I'd like your thoughts on that. Sound off in the comments. Oh, one nitpick I have. Why does it take so long to load the map? Why do we have a literal loading screen for the map? Oh, and don't get me started on the M key, bringing up the shop. I had to change that hotkey. I kept pressing it accidentally. M for map, but it's M for microtransaction. Another nitpick, they've changed the order of affix tiers. In PoE 1, a tier 1 affix is the best, and higher numbers are progressively worse. Now it's the other way around. Tier 1 are the worst, and higher numbers are better. I don't really care what order it goes into, except for the fact that it was easy to know in PoE 1 if you had a max affix item, because tier 1 is the max. Now, different affixes have different max tiers, so you have no way of knowing if, say, tier 6 is the highest tier on this affix without having to consult some external website. So something as simple as just showing tier 6 out of 6 in the tooltip, that would solve this. I'm guessing they deliberately reverse the order now so that they can always choose to add power creep options of higher tiers later on. Now again though, everything we've said here, I need to stress, I have been absolutely loving my playthrough of PoE 2 and I endorse the game. Any negatives or concerns that I'm bringing up here, they're not reasons to dislike the game, they're not reasons that I dislike the game, I don't dislike the game. We are in early access and the point of early access is to give feedback so that the game can be as close to perfect as possible at launch. Now is the time to give that feedback. Alright, on to some Diablo news. We got the reveal of the Ride to Hell holiday event, which will run from December 17th to January 2nd. The main thrust of the event is a community challenge to kill goblins, and if the community collectively reaches specific benchmarks, then awards are unlocked for all players. It sounds like goblins will be spawning more plentifully, and they're going to have little elf costumes, maybe? That's kind of cute. Once 5 million goblins are killed by the community, the tier 1 reward is unlocked. a legendary weapons cache, a random Undercity tribute, and some runes. Tier 2 needs 10 million goblins and includes a unique and legendary weapons cache, another random Undercity tribute, and more runes. Tier 3 is 15 million goblins and includes more runes, tributes, and unique weapons caches, as well as a cosmetic mount trophy. Tier 4 is 25 million goblins, has more runes, more ancestral uniques, another cosmetic mount trophy, plus citadel coins. And the 5th and final tier needs 40 million goblins and basically has a bunch of all that other stuff, plus a resplendent spark. So overall, we're looking at cosmetics, gear, runes, and a resplendent spark to help craft the mythic that you want, as well as Undercity tributes that'll give you a good chance at getting a mythic drop. Now, I actually really like the concept of this kind of community event. Community goals for all of us to work towards to unlock rewards for the whole community. Helldivers has leveraged this kind of stuff really well. I don't think this is my favorite implementation of this idea, but I'm really glad to see them doing this, and it makes me hopeful about what more can come in the future. I just think that this event, coming basically, 2.5 months after the start of a season, it's not going to energize and bring back players who are done with the season. It'll be good for, maybe new players hopping in who are picking up the game over the holidays, or people who haven't had a chance to really play the game that much. But most of the rewards are gear, and if you're done with the season, you don't need the gear. Then there's the 3 mount trophies, which it's nice, but I don't think mount trophies are enough to get people excited about coming back. Had this event happened 1 month into the season, yeah, that would have been better timed. Unfortunately, they can't really change when Christmas happens, so it's just unfortunate timing. But again, I really like the precedent that this sets. Imagine now a community event like this that pops up every season, maybe even multiple times during a season. Imagine this, 2 weeks into Season 7, we suddenly get a community event. 2 new threats have emerged. Vampires from Season 2 have invaded infernal hordes, and constructs from Season 3 have invaded helltides. Let's say we have 1 week to protect Sanctuary from these threats by going into those zones and killing those respective monsters. And the goal should be set up that we basically have to choose to focus on one or the other, or we're going to fail at both. There's going to be some kind of progress bar that fills, and Blizzard can do some trickery behind the scenes to manipulate the bar to keep things exciting, just like Helldivers does with Conquering Planets. If we succeed at the Infernal Hordes invasion, then for the rest of the season, Infernal Hordes drops 25% more ether. If we succeed at the Helltide invasion, then for the rest of the season, Helltide drops 25% more cinders. And if the servers get absolutely slammed and we somehow manage to succeed on both, then we get both. And if we fail, we get nothing. The key aspects here are the objectives are making us do things that we would want to be doing anyway. We're feeling a sense of accomplishment as a community and coming together and picking a goal to accomplish. And then feeling the effects of that win for a long time, not just an instant reward. We're giving a sense of agency and contributing towards what reward we get. And we're getting loot rewards at a time of the season when loot rewards are still meaningful to the majority of players. In fact, you can do one of these like every 2 weeks, thereby stockpiling more and more bonuses to XP and drops, whatever. The later into the season we go, effectively serving as like a catch-up mechanic for players who are late to the season, or otherwise, slower players, people slower than blasters are going to be done with the season in a week or two. Instead of adding a Mother's Blessing halfway into a season or towards the end of a season, just turning on randomly, have the community earn the Mother's Blessing. You can make some of these rewards be limited time things. Anyway, those are just some quick thoughts. Now, I know overall leading up to the release of PoE 2, people were saying that D4 is dead now because of PoE 2. And look, I'm loving PoE 2. And right now, the game that I want to be playing is PoE 2 and not D4. I'm done with the D4 season. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to play the next season of D4 when that launches. I really enjoyed Season 6. I'm done until Season 7. Both games are very different. Both games give different experiences and cater to different audiences. And I'm the kind of player who can enjoy both experiences for what they are. When I want something more laid back, fast-paced, casual, arcadey, and relaxing, I can play D4. And when I want something more intense and challenging and methodical, I can play PoE 2. PoE 2 will not kill D4 because there's a ton of people who enjoy a more casual game and PoE 2 is not for them. And that's okay, not every game has to be everything for everyone. But one thing I really feel we need in D4 that would keep me playing longer in a season is what I call a meta progression system for endgame. We've had Loot 2.0. We've had Progression 2.0. Now we need Endgame 2.0. We don't necessarily need new endgame activities. We've got many things to do. What we need is some system that ties together all the endgame activities we have and makes us feel like engaging with those activities is giving us meaningful progression towards some greater goal, like the Atlas in PoE 2 or the Monolith in Last Epoch. Meanwhile, Diablo Immortal is bringing Diablo into the game. Yep, Diablo Immortal gets Diablo before Diablo 4 does. And this is significant because Diablo Immortal takes place between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, and I presumed we were meant to be exploring stories that don't, mess with the timeline. But in an expansion that launched yesterday called Shattered Sanctuary, it turns out that Diablo got hold of a piece of the Shattered World Stone, and now, basically with a piece of creation in his hands, he can bend space-time to his will, so any kind of shenanigans can happen at this point, even if they don't make sense within the established canon because of timey-wimey hijinks. And while I can accept the logic of this, and I am generally into time travel nonsense, I'm not a fan of this direction, not because it doesn't make sense, but because it undermines the stories of Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. Some people are even suggesting that this could potentially impact the story of Diablo 4, and I certainly hope that won't happen. I don't know, maybe I'm just not being fair to Diablo Immortal, but the more they add into Immortal that seems to impact the Diablo canon, the more I want to pretend all of this stuff is just in some kind of Kelvin timeline alternate universe that I can treat as non-canon and just pretend didn't happen. I was okay with the original premise of Immortal's story. It takes place in that 20-year gap between D2 and D3. I imagined it would fill in some holes and maybe tell some smaller stories about characters we don't know about much. But it shouldn't be about Diablo. But when you have a live service game that runs for years, continuously adding content and content and content, the eventual problem you run into is that this is a really confining narrative design space, and you eventually start doing stuff that will raise questions about, okay, why is it that in Diablo 3, none of all this stuff that is becoming increasingly world-altering and shattering and important, why was none of this brought up in Diablo 3 or relevant or impactful to Diablo 3? How did we hit some reset button by the time Diablo 3 came around, or we just forgot all of this stuff? Anyway, for our last Diablo story, in an interview with Polygon, Diablo manager Rod Ferguson has expressed that he hates the expression, "it'll be ready when it's ready," which has basically been a Blizzard mantra forever. I mean, look, I also hate tautologies. "It'll be ready when it's ready" is a sentence that effectively says nothing, but the significance behind the statement in the context of Blizzard games has always been that the priority is on the game's quality rather than meeting a deadline. And so Rod's apparent opposition to this core Blizzard ethos has not exactly been received well by players. It sounds like a producer who just wants to ship product and doesn't care for the art of the craft. But when you hear his full statement, it makes more sense. His opposition isn't against a desire for quality, but more so the subliminal idea that the devs have no agency in when the game will be ready. As in, the game will be ready when we decide it's ready versus the game will be ready when the game decides it's ready. He said specifically, quote, "I hate the phrase, 'it's ready when it's ready.' When I first came to Blizzard, somebody put up a slide that had that on there, and I went, nope, you're deleting that." And they were like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "That's not how I make video games." It takes the agency away from the team. Saying it's ready when it's ready means the team doesn't have control over what they're building. You control the scope. You control the schedule. You control a bunch of things. The idea that the game has to reveal itself somehow with some unknown amount of content, I just find it's ready when it's ready to be so passive. I feel like it's like, I'm just going to watch this flower bloom and I don't know when it's going to bloom. It'll bloom sometime maybe next year or this year or at night or under the full moon, but it hopefully will bloom soon. So it could be throwing water and fertilizer on the flower and it's still not blooming. What's going on? I prefer to be like, hey, we're going to grow a flower that's going to bloom at about this time, and we're going to make sure that happens because we're going to do all the right things to make sure it happens. So hearing all of that, his annoyance with the phrase makes sense. He also added, quote, "Look, quality is implicit. It'll always be shipped at quality. Never at any point in time is the answer we trade quality for time or we trade quality for quantity. That is never ever the answer. Now the question about what's the time and what's the quantity, you control those." Basically, this is more about scope creep. Game devs can easily get into an endless cycle of adding more and more and more content and features to their game, which just keeps pushing back the release more and more and more without necessarily improving the quality of the game. Sometimes more content is just bloat. Still, though, it's kind of a sacred Blizzard phrase, one of the last vestiges of Mike Morhaim's Blizzard, so... Alright, on to the Game Awards. Astro Bot swept, taking home Best Game Direction, Best Family Game, Best Action Adventure, as well as Game of the Year. Metaphor ReFantazio also did really well, winning Best Narrative, Best Art Direction, Best RPG, and Balatro won Best Indie Game, Best Debut Indie Game, and Best Mobile Game. The overall theme of this Game Awards really was that games with heart and soul, rather than corporate products, are the big winners, with Larian Studios' Sven Vink giving a great speech to that effect before the Game of the Year reveal. Sony's $400 million live service shooter product, Concord, failing spectacularly this year, while their little Astro Bot 3D platformer project, winning Game of the Year, is perhaps the greatest example of this. Hopefully Sony learns the right lessons from this, because now, after 30 years, Sony finally has their own Mario, their own Sonic, their own Master Chief. Astro Bot can now be the official mascot of PlayStation. It did make things a little awkward that, during the acceptance speech, Astro Bot creative director Nicolas Doucet alluded to being forbidden from mentioning Nintendo, but he nonetheless went ahead and paid respect to Super Mario Bros. And the company behind it without directly saying Nintendo. I'm sure Sony wasn't very happy about their competitor being thanked during a Game of the Year acceptance speech, but hey, good for Doucet for speaking his truth. Outside of that, we got a lot of trailers during the awards. Some highlights include the Witcher 4 cinematic reveal, starring Ciri as a protagonist. No release date, and given they just went into full production about 2 months ago, I bet we're like 5 years out anyway. In supporting interviews with IGN, we learned that Ciri is a full Witcher now, somehow, and that Geralt will have some appearance in the game as more than just some kind of side reference. We kind of already knew that, though. The voice actor had confirmed it, I think, some time ago, that he's in the game, but he has very little screen time. I'm just glad Geralt has some presence, even if it's going to be a cameo. They couldn't bring him back as the protagonist. His story ended. He got his retirement. He earned it. It would have been more upsetting to disrupt that and make him the protagonist. But there is going to be a lot of pressure on CDPR to live up to The Witcher 3. Then we got the reveal of Elden Ring Nightreign, a 3-player co-op title that seems to be blending all of From Software's IPs into one. We see the Firekeeper from Dark Souls 3, the Nameless King, Centipede Demon. It's all set within the lands between. It's a non-canon standalone spin-off coming in 2025, in which 8 warriors known as Nightfarers will face 8 formidable threats. There's said to be new key locations, enemies, and weapons each time you play. You'll have to work together to survive for 3 days. So it sounds like a roguelike. The Elden Ring co-op mod has been incredibly popular. Good on From Software for finally delivering something official in that regard. Then we got an announcement trailer for a new Naughty Dog game, Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, featuring an 80s, 90s vaporwave aesthetic, complete with big brand logos everywhere. Some people are complaining about product placement, but really that's just a deliberate world-building choice, just like in Blade Runner. I have to say that the trailer left me underwhelmed, but it's Naughty Dog, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They've hired a bunch of TV and movie actors for this, plus they've got Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross on the soundtrack. The game is set thousands of years into the future and revolves around a bounty hunter who ends up stranded on a distant planet from which no one escapes. The story is said to be quite ambitious. We got a teaser trailer for an Okami sequel, with Kamiya back working with Capcom and production about to begin on the game. We got an official reveal trailer for Split Fiction, a split-screen co-op adventure game from the creators of It Takes Two. I didn't realize that they also made A Way Out. I've played and enjoyed both of those games, and they're at once very different from each other, but also similar. So I look forward to Split Fiction. Then, Obsidian revealed a first gameplay trailer for The Outer Worlds 2, which is releasing in 2025. Meaning they are releasing both this and Avowed in 2025. With these, they'll have released 5 games in the last 6 years. Kind of crazy. We got the official gameplay trailer of Slay the Spire 2 coming in 2025. Then Helldivers 2 revealed its biggest update yet. The third enemy faction, the Illuminate, are here, plus urban environments and multiplayer vehicles. Basically everything the community has been asking for in one big update. And the craziest thing was they released the update literally during the Game Awards. We got a trailer for Onimusha: Way of the Sword coming in 2026. We got the announcement trailer for a new upcoming game by Gen Design, the studio behind Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and The Last Guardian, which is looking like Shadow of the Colossus, but with Gundams. We got a trailer for Dispatch, made by former Telltale folks and featuring the voice talents of Laura Bailey and Aaron Paul. And we got an official first look at Borderlands 4 coming in 2025. Then in some quick Last Epoch news, we got word that Season 2 and Patch 1.2 will launch in April 2025. And it'll focus on expanding endgame content, offer a better new player experience, and improve dungeons, performance, and balance. Last Epoch's a great game. It's a shame that the team has not been able to get updates out quicker, because it means that we're going to be reaching the game's 1-year anniversary since launch in February, and we've only had one season so far. What could have been a title competing for our attention alongside Path of Exile and Diablo just has not had enough going on with it to bring players back. I hope the wait will be worth it in April, and that they find their groove and can start releasing content on a more regular schedule, because as it stands, alongside D4 and PoE 2, Last Epoch offers the most robust crafting experience, which a lot of players have a craving for, and Last Epoch is the only title here right now to fill that need, apart from Path of Exile 1. Then lastly, in some Ubisoft news, according to Reuters, the Guillemot family is desperately trying to retain control of their company. They're allegedly in talks with Tencent to take the company private, but there's allegedly a disagreement over who would have control going forward. The Guillemot family wants to remain in control, but Tencent seems to want to take control themselves, or at least more control than they currently have. So, big picture here. What's going on? Ubisoft stock has been tanking. Like, big disaster. Ubisoft is a publicly traded company. The Guillemot family owns the biggest stake in Ubisoft, but not a huge percentage overall. And so with their stock price plummeting, some other entity could, in theory, swoop in and buy up a majority share, which would be a hostile takeover. The Guillemot family wants to avoid this. They want to take the company private, but to do that, they need the help of a partner because they need money, because they can't foot the bill themselves. Tencent currently owns a 49.9% stake in the Guillemot Brothers Limited. That's the Guillemot's family that owns the stake in Ubisoft. And so in exchange for helping fund the privatization, it seems like Tencent would want to take control of Ubisoft, have a better influence in that regard. So negotiations have allegedly stalled out, and it sounds like Tencent is just going to play chicken until the Guillemot family caves. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed Diablo 4's Dark Citadel controversy. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.